The morning sun cast long shadows across Miller's Creek, a small town in northern Virginia where everyone knew everyone else's business. At least, they thought they did. Sarah Mitchell sat alone at the corner booth of Joe's Diner, the same spot she'd chosen every morning for the past 3 weeks. She was a small woman, maybe 5'4", with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were plain jeans and a navy blue hoodie. She never made eye contact with anyone, never spoke unless spoken to, and even then her answers were short. One word if possible. The locals had already formed their opinions. "That woman's got something wrong with her," Martha Henderson whispered to her husband, loud enough for half the diner to hear. "Been here almost a month and barely says 2 words. Strange, if you ask me." Frank, the owner of the hardware store, nodded from his stool at the counter. "Probably running from something, or someone. Women like that always are." Sarah heard every word. She always did, but her face showed nothing. She simply took another sip of her black coffee and stared out the window at the quiet street beyond. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Sarah Mitchell wasn't running from anything. She was recovering. 12 years as a Navy SEAL, including 5 years with an elite special operations unit, had left their mark. Not on her body, which was still strong and capable despite her small frame, but on her mind, on her soul. The last mission had been the hardest, a hostage rescue in a country she wasn't allowed to name. She'd gotten all 6 hostages out alive, but 3 of her teammates hadn't made it home. The Navy had given her medals. Her commanders had called her a hero, but Sarah felt like a ghost. So she'd come to Miller's Creek, to her late grandmother's old house on Maple Street, to find some peace, to sleep without nightmares, to exist without the weight of life-and-death decisions crushing down on her shoulders every single day. "More coffee, hun?" The waitress, a kind woman named Donna, held up the pot with a gentle smile. "Yes, please, thank you." Sarah's voice was soft, almost a whisper. Donna patted her shoulder as she poured. She was one of the few people in town who didn't treat Sarah like a puzzle to be solved or a threat to be watched. Just a customer who liked her coffee hot and her breakfast simple. The bell above the diner door jangled. 3 men walked in, and the pleasant morning atmosphere shifted. Sarah felt it immediately, that prickle at the back of her neck that came from years of training and instinct. The man in front was tall and broad, with a shaved head and a sneer that seemed permanently fixed on his face. His name was Derek Palmer, though Sarah didn't know that yet. He owned the construction company in town, and he thought that made him important. His 2 friends followed behind like shadows, Tommy and Brett, neither one smart enough to have an original thought. They took the booth directly behind Sarah, their voices loud and rough. "Can't believe they hired a woman for that security job at the base," Derek said, his voice dripping with contempt. "What's she gonna do if there's real trouble? Cry at 'em?" His friends laughed, the sound harsh and ugly. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she didn't turn around. It wasn't about her. She didn't work security at the nearby military installation. She didn't work anywhere, but she knew the kind of men these were. She'd met them before, in uniform and out. Men who thought strength only came in one size and one gender. "Woman's place ain't in a uniform," Tommy added, his voice thick with ignorance. "It's in the kitchen or the bedroom, that's it." More laughter, louder this time. Sarah set down her coffee cup, her hand steady. She pulled a $10 bill from her pocket and placed it on the table. Then she stood slowly and walked toward the door. As she passed their booth, Derek stuck his leg out into the aisle. She stopped, looked down at his boot, then up at his face. "Oops," he said, grinning. "Didn't see you there, you're so little." His friends thought this was hilarious. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were calm, empty, even, and somehow that was more frightening than anger would have been. Then she stepped over his leg and walked out of the diner without a word. Behind her, Derek felt a chill run down his spine, though he'd never admit it. There had been something in that woman's eyes, something that said she'd seen things he couldn't imagine, done things he wouldn't survive. But he shook it off and ordered his breakfast, already forgetting the small, quiet woman he just disrespected. He would remember her soon enough. Part 2, Lines Crossed. Sarah spent the afternoon working in her grandmother's garden, pulling weeds and trimming the overgrown hedges. The physical work helped. It always did. It gave her hands something to do and her mind a chance to quiet down. Her grandmother's house was small but comfortable, set back from the road behind a line of oak trees. The nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away. That was another reason Sarah had come here. Space, silence, distance from the noise and chaos that had filled her life for over a decade. She was deadheading roses when she heard the truck. The engine was loud, deliberately so, with a modified exhaust that announced its arrival long before it appeared. Sarah straightened, her instincts immediately alert. The truck, a lifted black pickup with oversized tires, slowed as it passed her driveway, then stopped. Derek Palmer leaned out the driver's side window, that same sneer on his face. "Hey there, little lady," he called out. "You look like you could use some help with that yard work. Too much for someone your size to handle alone." Tommy and Brett were in the truck with him, both grinning like this was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Sarah turned back to her roses without answering. "I'm talking to you," Derek said, his voice harder now. "It's rude to ignore people in this town. We're just trying to be neighborly." She kept working, her movements calm and deliberate. Snip, drop the dead flower, move to the next one, breathe. "Stuck up," Brett muttered, loud enough to carry. "Thinks she's too good for us." The truck door opened. Sarah heard Derek's boots hit the pavement, heard him walk to the edge of her driveway. Every muscle in her body tensed, but her face remained blank, unreadable. "You know what I think," Derek said, his voice closer now. "I think you're one of those angry women, the kind who hates men because no man wants her. That why you're out here all alone. Nobody could stand you." Tommy laughed. "Probably couldn't keep a husband, too mousy, too weird." Sarah set down her garden shears and slowly turned to face them. All three men were at the edge of her property now, standing in a line like they owned the world. "Please leave," she said quietly. Derek took a step onto her grass. "Or what? You gonna call the sheriff? Good luck with that. His nephew works for me. We're practically family." "Last chance," Sarah said. "Leave now." "You threatening me?" Derek moved closer, invading her space deliberately. He was at least a foot taller than her and outweighed her by 100 pounds. "You really want to go there, little girl?" Sarah's eyes locked onto his. For just a moment, she let him see what was beneath the quiet exterior. The steel. The ice-cold control of someone who had been trained to kill in 100 different ways and had done so when necessary. Derek's grin faltered. He felt it again, that chill. That sense of danger his primitive brain recognized even if his ego refused to. But his friends were watching, and his pride was bigger than his common sense. "You got 5 seconds to get off my property," Sarah said, her voice still quiet but different now. There was something in it, something that made the hair on the back of Tommy's neck stand up. "Or what?" Derek challenged, puffing out his chest. Sarah didn't answer. She simply walked past him toward her front door. Derek, feeling dismissed and humiliated, grabbed her arm. It happened so fast that later none of them could really explain it. One moment Derek's hand was on Sarah's arm. The next, he was on his back on the ground, gasping for air with Sarah standing over him. She hadn't punched him, hadn't kicked him. She'd simply moved, and gravity and leverage had done the rest. "Stay off my property," she said calmly. Then she walked into her house and closed the door. The three men stood there in shock. Derek slowly got to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and rage. "Did you see that?" Tommy whispered. "How did she?" "Shut up," Derek snarled. He brushed dirt off his jeans, his hands shaking with humiliation and anger. "Just shut up." They got back in the truck and drove away, but Derek's mind was already working. Nobody made a fool of him, not in his town, not some weird, mousy woman who thought she was tough. He'd make her pay for that. Inside her house, Sarah locked the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. Not from fear, from frustration. She'd come here to escape conflict, to find peace, and now she'd just painted a target on her back. She'd seen men like Derek before. They never let things go. Their egos wouldn't allow it. She walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, forcing her breathing to slow. Maybe it would blow over. Maybe Derek would think twice and leave her alone. But as she looked out the window at the empty road, Sarah knew better. Some men only understood one language, and she'd just spoken it to Derek Palmer. 3 days passed. 3 quiet days where Sarah almost convinced herself that Derek Palmer had learned his lesson and moved on. She was wrong. On Thursday afternoon, Sarah drove into town to pick up groceries. Miller's Creek had one small supermarket, and Sarah had learned to shop early in the day when it was less crowded. Fewer people meant fewer stares, fewer whispers. But today felt different. As she pushed her cart down the cereal aisle, she noticed people looking at her more than usual. Not just curious glances, these were hard looks, judgmental, even hostile. At the checkout, Wendy Carter, who'd always been polite before, rang up her items in cold silence. No greeting, no small talk. "Have a good day," Sarah said softly as she took her bags. Wendy just turned away without answering. Outside, Sarah loaded her groceries into her old Honda and saw a group of men standing by Derek's truck in the parking lot. Derek was holding court, gesturing with his hands, telling some story that had the others nodding and muttering. When Derek spotted Sarah, he smiled. Not a friendly smile, a predator's smile. Sarah got in her car and drove home, her instincts screaming that something was very wrong. She found out what that night. Around 9 o'clock, Sarah was reading in her living room when she heard vehicles approaching. Multiple vehicles. She went to the window and looked out. 5 trucks were parked at the end of her driveway, their headlights pointed at her house like spotlights. At least a dozen men stood in the glare, and Derek Palmer was front and center. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She assessed the situation with the cold logic of someone who'd planned combat operations. She was outnumbered but had the advantage of defensive position. The house had good sight lines, multiple exits, but this wasn't a war zone. This was Virginia. These were civilians. Even if they were acting like an angry mob. Her phone was in her hand when someone pounded on the front door. "Sarah Mitchell," Derek's voice boomed. "We need to talk to you." She didn't answer. Instead, she dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? "This is Sarah Mitchell, 447 Maple Street. I have approximately 12 men on my property refusing to leave. I feel threatened." The pounding continued. "Mitchell, get out here." "Ma'am, deputies are on their way," the dispatcher said. "Stay inside and keep your doors locked." "Thank you." Sarah ended the call and moved away from the front of the house. She went to her bedroom and opened the safe she kept in her closet. Inside was her service weapon, a Sig Sauer P226 she'd carried for 8 years. She checked the magazine, chambered a round, and set it on the dresser within reach. She didn't want to use it, prayed she wouldn't have to. But she'd also learned a long time ago that hope wasn't a strategy. Outside, Derek's voice rose. "I told everyone what you are, told them about your kind, coming to our town, acting all superior, attacking innocent men." Sarah's blood ran cold. He was lying, spreading stories, turning the town against her. "She assaulted me on my own property," Derek shouted, his voice carrying not just to the men with him but into the night where other neighbors might hear. "Attacked me for no reason, and the sheriff ain't gonna do nothing because she's probably got some sob story, but we know the truth." This was how it started, Sarah knew. One man's wounded pride, one lie, then another, and suddenly an innocent person became a target. She heard glass break. Someone had thrown something at her house. The men cheered. Sarah's hand moved toward her weapon, but she forced herself to stop. Not yet. Not unless they broke in. She wouldn't become what they claimed she was. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. "Let's go," someone said. "Cops are coming." "This ain't over, Mitchell," Derek yelled. "Not by a long shot." The trucks roared to life and pulled away just as two sheriff's vehicles turned onto Maple Street. Sarah went outside to meet the deputies. One was a young man who looked barely old enough to shave. The other was older, with gray hair and tired eyes. His name badge read Collins. "Ms. Mitchell, you called about a disturbance." "Yes." Derek Palmer and about 12 others. "They were trespassing, making threats, and someone threw something through my window." Deputy Collins wrote in his notebook, "Anyone hurt?" "No." "You know what this is about." Sarah explained the incident at the diner, Derek showing up at her house, the confrontation in her yard. "So you admit you put your hands on Derek Palmer?" the younger deputy said, his tone accusatory. Sarah looked at him steadily. "He grabbed me first. I removed his hand and escorted him off my property. I didn't hurt him. I could have. I didn't." "That's not what he says," the deputy continued. "He says you attacked him without provocation." "Then he's lying." Deputy Collins held up a hand, silencing his partner. "We'll talk to Derek, get his side. But Ms. Mitchell, can I give you some advice? Sometimes in a small town, it's better to just apologize and move on, even if you don't think you did anything wrong. Pride ain't worth the trouble it brings." Sarah stared at him, understanding exactly what he wasn't saying. "You're an outsider. Derek has friends here. This won't go your way." "I have nothing to apologize for," she said quietly. Collins sighed. "Then I hope you're ready for whatever comes next, because Derek Palmer doesn't let things go." The deputies left. Sarah went back inside, swept up the broken glass, and boarded up the window. Then she sat in the darkness of her living room and accepted the truth she'd been avoiding. Miller's Creek wasn't going to be her sanctuary. It was going to be her battlefield. The harassment escalated over the next week, like a carefully orchestrated campaign. Someone slashed Sarah's tires while her car was parked at the post office. The supermarket manager told her she was no longer welcome to shop there due to complaints from other customers. Anonymous notes appeared in her mailbox, some calling her names, others making vague threats. Through it all, Sarah remained calm. She documented everything with photographs and written reports. She called the sheriff's office each time, and each time Deputy Collins showed up, wrote in his notebook, and did absolutely nothing. "Can't prove who did it," he'd say, his voice apologetic but his eyes empty of real sympathy. The town had made its choice. Derek Palmer was one of theirs, Sarah was not. But what Derek and his followers didn't know was that every insult, every act of vandalism, every threat was being observed by someone else. Her name was Captain Lisa Chen, and she was Sarah Mitchell's former commanding officer. She was also the head of Naval Special Warfare Command's Transition Assistance Program, which meant she kept tabs on SEALs who'd left active duty, especially those struggling with adjustment. When Sarah had stopped answering her weekly check-in calls, Captain Chen had grown concerned. When she couldn't reach Sarah by phone, she'd driven down from Norfolk to check on her. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, driving an unmarked car and wearing civilian clothes. What she found made her blood boil. Sarah's house showed signs of repeated vandalism. Her mailbox had been knocked over. Someone had spray-painted a crude word on her garage door, and Sarah herself looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. "How long has this been going on?" Captain Chen asked after Sarah let her in. "Couple weeks." Sarah's voice was flat, defeated. "It's fine, I can handle it." "Mitchell, look at me." Captain Chen waited until Sarah met her eyes. This is not fine. This is harassment. This is a coordinated campaign to drive you out of your own home. They don't know who I am, Sarah said quietly. They don't know what I can do, and that's good. I don't want to be that person anymore. And what person is that? The one who solves problems with violence. Captain Chen sat down across from Sarah. There's a difference between being violent and protecting yourself, between being aggressive and standing up for what's right. I just want to be left alone. And you have that right. These people are taking it from you. Captain Chen leaned forward. Tell me who's behind this. Sarah hesitated, then told her everything. About Derek Palmer, about the mob at her house, about the sheriff's department doing nothing. Captain Chen's jaw tightened as she listened. When Sarah finished, the captain pulled out her phone. What are you doing? Sarah asked. Making some calls. See, Derek Palmer isn't just harassing a random woman. He's harassing a decorated Navy SEAL who served this country for 12 years. And his friend the sheriff, the one looking the other way. He's about to find out what happens when federal authorities take an interest in civil rights violations. Lisa, don't. It'll just make things worse. No, Sarah, it'll make things right. Captain Chen started dialing. You've been trying to handle this the quiet way, the peaceful way, and where has that gotten you? It's time these people learned exactly who they're dealing with. Over the next 3 days, things happened very quickly. FBI agents arrived in Miller's Creek to investigate potential civil rights violations. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service opened an inquiry into threats against a former member of Naval Special Warfare. The media picked up the story, not the local paper, but national news outlets. Decorated female Navy SEAL harassed in small town made for compelling headlines. Derek Palmer suddenly found his construction company under investigation by OSHA for safety violations. The sheriff's department received a visit from the state attorney general's office. Several of the men who'd been part of the mob at Sarah's house received subpoenas. Derek went from town big shot to pariah in 72 hours. But Derek was also stupid, angry, and desperate. On Friday night, drunk and furious, he decided to end things his way. He took his hunting rifle, got in his truck, and drove to Maple Street. He was going to scare Sarah Mitchell so badly she'd leave town and drop all the charges and investigations. Just scare her. That was the plan. But when Derek Palmer pulled into Sarah's driveway with a loaded rifle and revenge in his heart, he made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd forgotten that before Sarah Mitchell was a quiet neighbor trying to heal, she'd been Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. Navy SEAL Sarah heard Derek's truck before she saw it. The distinctive rumble of the modified exhaust was unmistakable, and at 11 o'clock at night, there was no innocent reason for him to be on her property. She was ready. Not because she wanted this confrontation, but because she'd been trained to always be prepared. She'd already called Captain Chen, who'd insisted on staying in town at a local hotel. She'd already set up her phone to record everything. And yes, her service weapon was within reach. But Sarah had no intention of using it unless absolutely necessary. Derek stumbled out of his truck, clearly drunk, carrying a hunting rifle. Sarah watched him from the darkness of her living room, her phone recording through the window. "Mitchell," Derek shouted, slurring the name. "Get out here. We're gonna settle this right now." Sarah stayed silent and still. She'd already hit the panic button on her phone that automatically called 911 and Captain Chen simultaneously. "You think you're so tough," Derek swayed, pointing the rifle vaguely in the direction of the house. "Think you can come to my town and ruin my life? I built this place, me, and you're nobody." He fired a shot into the air. The sound cracked through the night like thunder. That changed everything. An armed, intoxicated man firing a weapon. This was now an active threat. Sarah moved with the silent efficiency of someone who'd done hostage rescues and combat operations in the dark. She exited through her back door, circled around through her grandmother's garden, and approached Derek from behind. He never saw her coming. She moved like a shadow, closing the distance between them in seconds. Derek started to turn, perhaps sensing movement, but by then it was too late. Sarah swept his legs out from under him with a technique she'd performed hundreds of times in training and several times in real operations. Derek went down hard, the rifle clattering from his hands. Before he could react, Sarah had the weapon secured and Derek face down on the ground with her knee on his back. "Don't move," she said quietly. "Police are on the way." Derek struggled, his alcohol-soaked brain not processing what had just happened. "Get off me. You can't, You came to my home with a loaded weapon while intoxicated and fired that weapon in a threatening manner," Sarah said, her voice eerily calm. "You're looking at multiple felonies. I suggest you stop talking." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Derek started to cry. Not from pain, Sarah wasn't hurting him, but from the sudden, crushing realization of what he'd done. "I just wanted you gone," he sobbed. "You made me look stupid. You ruined everything." "No," Sarah said. "You did that yourself." 3 sheriff's vehicles screamed into the driveway, followed by Captain Chen in her car. Deputies poured out, weapons drawn. "On the ground," one of them shouted. "I am on the ground," Derek whimpered. "Federal officer," Captain Chen called out, holding up her credentials. "Stand down. Situation is under control." Deputy Collins approached cautiously, his face pale as he took in the scene. Sarah Mitchell, all 5'4" of her, kneeling on the back of Derek Palmer, who'd been the town tough guy just a week ago. Derek's rifle was safely out of reach. Sarah was calm, controlled, completely in command. "Ms. Mitchell, you can let him go now," Collins said quietly. Sarah stood smoothly and stepped back. 2 deputies immediately moved in to handcuff Derek. "He came onto my property with a loaded weapon while intoxicated," Sarah said. "He fired that weapon in a threatening manner. It's all recorded on my phone." She held up the device, still recording. Collins nodded slowly. "Derek Palmer, you're under arrest." As they led Derek to a patrol car, he looked back at Sarah. All the smugness, all the bullying confidence was gone. In its place was fear and a grudging respect. "Who are you?" he whispered. Sarah met his eyes. Someone who just wanted to be left alone. The aftermath came quickly. Derek Palmer was charged with multiple felonies, including assault with a deadly weapon, making terroristic threats and weapons charges. He took a plea deal that sent him to prison for 3 years. Several of his friends who'd participated in the harassment faced civil rights violation charges. The sheriff's department underwent a federal review and mandatory retraining on handling harassment complaints. But the most important changes happened in Miller's Creek itself. The story spread, not Derek's version but the truth. Sarah Mitchell wasn't some angry outsider. She was a Navy SEAL, a decorated veteran who'd served her country for 12 years. She'd rescued hostages. She'd saved lives. She'd earned medals for valor. And she'd come to their town, seeking nothing more than peace and quiet. The residents of Miller's Creek, most of them good people who'd simply believed Derek's lies, were horrified. They'd persecuted a hero. The apologies started within days. Donna from the diner came to Sarah's door with a homemade pie. "I'm so sorry," she said, tears in her eyes. "I should have stood up for you." Frank from the hardware store left a note and a gift card. The supermarket manager personally called to apologize and offer free delivery for a year. Martha Henderson, who'd been one of the first to gossip about Sarah, wrote a long letter of apology that Sarah found in her mailbox. "I judged you without knowing you," it read. "That was wrong, and I'm ashamed." Sarah accepted each apology with quiet grace. She understood mob mentality. She'd seen it in war zones. Good people could be led astray by bad leaders. 6 months later, Miller's Creek was a different place. Sarah was no longer the strange outsider. She was a neighbor, a friend, someone people waved to on the street and invited to community events. She still didn't talk much about her service. That remained private, but she'd found what she'd been looking for, peace. She was in Joe's diner one morning, sitting in her usual corner booth, when a young woman approached her table. She was maybe 22, wearing an army uniform. "Ms. Mitchell," the young woman said nervously, "I'm Private Jessica Torres. I'm stationed at the base nearby, and I heard about what you did, not just with Derek Palmer but before, your service. And I wanted to say thank you for showing people that women can be warriors too." Sarah looked up at this young soldier, seeing in her eyes the same determination she'd once felt. "You don't need me to show you that," Sarah said gently. "You already know it. You're wearing the uniform. You took the oath. That makes you a warrior." Jessica smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. Could I ask you about your service sometime, about being a SEAL?" Sarah hesitated. She'd spent months trying to leave that life behind, but looking at this young woman, she realized something. Maybe her service wasn't over. Maybe it had just changed forms. "Sit down," Sarah said, gesturing to the seat across from her. "I'll buy you breakfast." As Jessica sat down, her face bright with hope and excitement, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. She'd come to Miller's Creek to hide from the world. But sometimes the world needed you to stand up, to speak out, to show people what real strength looked like. Sometimes being a warrior meant fighting. And sometimes it meant teaching the next generation how to fight their own battles. Outside, the morning sun rose over Miller's Creek, lighting up a town that had learned a valuable lesson. Never judge people by their size, their silence, or their appearance.